I want to be clear about one thing before I explain the rest of it. I was handing out supply manifests. That is the full extent of what I was doing. I was the Compact Civilian Supply Coordinator at Velker Joint Forward Station North. It was the third morning of the Velkerin 7th Unit's rotation ceremony, and someone in the coordination office had decided that the optimal moment to distribute the incoming supply manifests to the unit's logistics officers was during the ceremony's third morning assembly, because that was when all relevant personnel would be gathered in the same courtyard. The manifest was a standard 12-page compact supply document. It had my coordinator's seal on the cover and a routing notation on page 3. It was not, in any respect, a romantic gesture. I handed it to Warrior Kale Vor at 7:40 on a Tuesday. By 7:42, I was aware that I had done something significant. I was not yet aware of what. The third morning assembly of a Velkerin unit rotation ceremony occupies a specific position in their military calendar. I knew that much from the briefing packet the joint station distributed to all compact personnel on arrival. It described the three-morning ceremony in terms of its administrative function and noted that compact personnel should be respectful of the proceedings. What the briefing packet had not mentioned, or had mentioned in a section I had read with insufficient attention 11 months ago when I first arrived at Orth, was the specific cultural weight of the third morning's assembly itself. The Velkerin rotation ceremony runs across 3 mornings. The first morning is the arrival acknowledgement. The unit registers its presence at the joint station, reviews its posting terms, and confirms its complement. That part is administrative. The second morning is the unit accounting, in which the unit's resources, obligations, and coordination assignments are formally distributed. That part is logistical. I had attended both with no incident because both involved the kind of procedural content I was accustomed to operating in. The third morning is the honor binding. The honor binding is the ceremony in which the unit formally commits to the joint station and its obligations, and in which any formal offers of alliance, partnership, or bond between a Velar warrior and a non-clan member are made and received. It is, in the Velkerin ceremonial structure, the most significant of the 3 mornings, and its significance is carried through a specific ritual mechanism. The offering party approaches the warrior they wish to bind with and presents them with a carried object. Something in their hands, something they brought deliberately to the ceremony with the intention of giving it. The warrior receives the object, and the ceremony's witnesses become the bond's witnesses. The bond is considered established at the moment of receipt in the presence of the unit. I had walked into the honor binding with 12 supply manifests and had been distributing them to the logistics officers standing in the unit formation because they were in the courtyard. I had the manifests, and the coordination office had told me the assembly was the most efficient moment for distribution. Warrior Kale Vor was not the logistics officer I had been directed to find. Warrior Kale Vor was standing near the logistics officer's row in the Velkerin ceremonial formation, positioned between the 3rd and 4th logistics personnel in the row because of some internal unit arrangement I had not had access to. When I worked my way along the row, handing manifests to each logistics officer in turn, she was the next person I reached. I looked at my routing sheet to confirm the last name and held out the last manifest without looking up because I was checking the page 3 notation against the distribution list. The manifest was in her hands before I raised my eyes. The courtyard went quiet. It had been, until that moment, a courtyard with approximately 60 Velkerin warriors in ceremonial formation and the ambient sounds of a busy joint station at 7:40, transit vehicles on the upper platform beginning the morning delivery rotation, the mess hall starting its service behind the north wall, and the gap wind coming through the eastern ridge the way it did every morning at roughly that hour. All of that was still happening. What had stopped was the human register of noise, the shuffling of position adjustments, the low murmur of the 2 warriors near the logistics row who had been trading a quiet observation, the small collected sound of 60 people standing together in a shared space. All of it stopped at once in the way silence happens when it is a response to something rather than the absence of sound. They were all looking at me. I became aware of this in sequence. The unit formation to my left, which had been in the loose attention of ceremony witnesses, was now in the tight attention of people who had seen something happen and were waiting to understand what happened next. The logistics officers to my right were not looking at their manifests. The senior officer at the front of the formation, whom I recognized as the unit's compact liaison counterpart, had an expression I could not read. Warrior Kale Vor, 2 feet in front of me, was holding the supply manifest in both hands. She was tall, even for a Valkyrin, with the posture of someone for whom standing straight was not a discipline but simply a way of being. Gray-blue skin, the color of the eastern ridge just before the sun cleared it in the morning. Not the first light, but the second light, the one that committed to being daylight. Dark hair, cropped close at the sides and left slightly longer on top in the cut that I had learned, during 11 months at Orth, was the warrior-grade field cut rather than the ceremonial cut. She wore the warrior's formal unit rotation insignia on her left shoulder. Her eyes, looking at me across the 12-page supply manifest she held with both hands, were the color of pale silver. Not gray exactly, not quite blue. A specific shade between them that the light was doing something particular to in that moment, something I did not yet have a category for. She looked at the manifest, then back at me. She said something in Valkyrin. My Valkyrin liaison coordinator, Sef Velarin, appeared at my left elbow approximately 4 seconds later. Sef was a compact, efficient man who had been stationed at Orth for 6 years and had developed, during that time, a particular methodology for unexpected situations. He appeared. He assessed. He addressed. He did it very quickly and without an expression that could be characterized as anything other than professionally neutral, which I appreciated considerably. Hest, he said quietly. He used my surname, which he reserved for moments requiring a particular register. Do you know what you have done? I handed her a supply manifest, I said. In the context of the honor-binding ceremony, he said, you have offered Warrior Kale for a formal bond proposal. I looked at him. The third morning ceremony, he said, uses the offering of a carried object as the mechanism of the honor binding. You approached, you presented, and you gave her something you were carrying with the intention of giving it. He paused, and his pause had the quality of someone selecting words with precision. She received it in the presence of the unit's witnesses. I looked at the 60 Valkyrin warriors. They were looking at me with the attentiveness of people who had witnessed something and were assessing it. The particular quality of composed assessment is that it does not look like attention. It looks like stillness. And the stillness has a weight to it that you learn to read over time. I looked at Warrior Kalevor. She was still holding the manifest in both hands. She had not moved. She was looking at me with an expression I would eventually come to recognize as Valkyrin composed surprise. The face they made when something had happened that they had not anticipated and they were genuinely uncertain how to categorize. It was not an unhappy expression. It was the expression of someone who had received unexpected information and was being honest with themselves about the fact that the unexpected information was not unwelcome. There was something in those pale silver eyes that was not quite amusement, in the same way that the second ridge light was not quite dawn. It was the color just before you named what it was. What do? I said. Nothing, said Sef. The bond proposal has been made and received. The ceremony's witnesses have observed it. The correct response now is to allow the ceremony to continue without further action from you, and to allow the unit to proceed through the remainder of the third morning assembly. He paused. I will file a clarification document with the Compact Coordination Office this afternoon. What does the clarification document do? It explains that the offering was made in error by a civilian supply coordinator who was unaware of the ceremony's third morning protocol and intended only to distribute a routing document to the unit's logistics personnel. He said this with the tone of a man who had developed an efficient process for explaining things that required careful language. It is not unprecedented. There have been 4 similar incidents at Joint Compact Valkyrin stations in the past 11 years involving compact personnel unfamiliar with the honor-binding mechanism. The clarification document provides a formal record of the error and allows the warrior who received the bond proposal to accept the dissolution. They always accepted. He adjusted his collar. 3 accepted it, he said. In one case, the warrior did not. What happened in that case? The warrior elected to continue the bond recognition custom for the 3 required mornings and assess the situation at the conclusion of the required observance. He paused. The bond is ongoing. They were posted to the same station for 3 years. I understand they have since requested co-assignment. I looked at Warrior Kalevor again. She had shifted her grip on the manifest. She was now holding it with one hand in the standard logistics officer receiving grip, her thumb resting on the routing notation on the cover, as though she had decided the ceremony's moment had passed and the document was now simply a document. She looked at me with those pale silver eyes and did not look away when I met them. "File the clarification document," I said. "Of course," said Seth. The ceremony resumed. I stood at the back of the courtyard until it concluded because leaving would have been more conspicuous than staying, and I had already provided the ceremony with more conspicuousness than I had intended. Then I walked back to the supply bay and spent the remainder of the morning on a shipment inventory, which I checked 3 times and found no errors in because I was being very careful with the inventory. At approximately 7:40 the next morning, there were 3 even strikes on the doorframe of my supply bay. The 3-knock pattern was not something I had heard at my door before. Compact personnel used 2 knocks or none, depending on whether the door was open. The 3-knock pattern was what I came to understand, once I had the documentation, as the Velkarin formal announcement. The sound of someone who knew their presence required acknowledgement and was indicating it precisely. I looked up from my desk. Warrior Kael'vor was standing in the doorway. She was wearing her standard warrior utility uniform rather than ceremonial attire, and she was carrying 2 metal cups. She set one on the ledge of the doorframe on the side nearest the opening, technically in the threshold space rather than inside my working area, and then stood in the doorway, drinking from the other cup with the expression of someone who was doing something entirely within the bounds of established protocol while also being aware that the person on the other side of the desk was not certain of that. "Good morning," she said in trade language. Her trade language was precise and slightly formal, with the particular quality of a language learned from written documentation rather than conversation. "Good morning," I replied. "The morning acknowledgement is the first step of the bond recognition custom," she said. "I am told compact personnel are sometimes unfamiliar with it. I am following the custom's requirements." She paused. "The custom requires 3 mornings. Your coordinator filed the clarification document yesterday afternoon." "He did," I said. "It was a thorough document. Your coordinator writes clearly." She took another sip from her cup. "The Velkarin custom regarding clarification documents is that the warrior who received the bond proposal may accept the dissolution, in which case the bond is formally ended and the morning acknowledgement is not required. Or the warrior may acknowledge the clarification and continue the morning acknowledgement for the required 3 mornings regardless, after which the situation is formally concluded." She looked at the cup she had placed on the doorframe ledge. "I am continuing the morning acknowledgement for the 3 required mornings." "After which it concludes?" I asked. "Unless both parties elect to continue it." She looked directly at me. "That is Section 4 of the documentation. I will give you the documentation on the 3rd morning." "Why the 3rd morning?" I asked. Those pale silver eyes held a quality I still did not have a name for. "So you have time to read it," she said. "What is in the cup?" I asked because it was the most neutral question available, and I was finding neutral questions useful. "Velkarin morning grain," she replied. "Your mess hall does not carry it. I brought enough for 2. She gestured toward the cup resting on the doorframe ledge. I picked it up. It was warm, heavier than a compact mess cup. The contents smelled like something I did not yet have a word for. Not unpleasant. Slightly sweet, with something underneath that I would eventually identify as the scent of the eastern ridge in the morning, when the gap wind carried the valley air through the station. Plant-like smell. Specific. Grounded. The kind that settled quietly into memory and returned at unexpected moments. "It's good," I said. The corner of her mouth moved. On a human face, the movement would have been negligible. On a Velkarin face, I was still building the reference library that told me what each expression meant. This one I filed away and would later confirm. "I know," she said. She finished her cup. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Same time." She retrieved the empty cup from the ledge and walked away down the supply corridor with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who had done exactly what they had come to do. I sat at my desk with the empty cup, the inventory sheet, and the growing awareness that the clarification document had not resolved the situation in the direction it had been intended to. The second morning, she brought the grain again. We talked for 12 minutes about the supply routing system for Earth's outer platform deliveries. She had apparently been reading the station's logistics documentation. She asked 2 specific questions about cross-station manifest formatting that required equally specific answers, the kind of questions that came from someone who had actually read the technical annex rather than simply skimming it. I gave her the answers. She listened with the focused attention of someone who asked questions because they genuinely wanted the information, not because asking was merely a social ritual. By the end of those 12 minutes, I was aware that she was considerably more interesting than the situation I had accidentally created and was still intermittently mortified about. The third morning, she brought the grain again, along with a flat data card, which she placed beside the cup on the doorframe ledge. The documentation, she said. The morning acknowledgement custom in full trade language. She paused. Section 4 is the relevant section for your purposes. Section 6 is also worth reading. Why Section 6? I asked. Context, she replied. Most compact personnel only read Section 4. I looked at the data card. You're giving me this on the last morning? Yes. That is a specific choice of timing. Those pale silver eyes held the same expression I still had not fully learned to name. It is, she said. The documentation is complete. I recommend reading it when you have time. She finished her morning grain, picked up both cups, and left in the same unhurried way she always did, the way of someone who had done exactly what they had come to do. I read the data card.